Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're strapping in for a thorough examination of one of the most persistent and puzzling economic realities of our time. We're talking about that paradox of soaring technological productivity, happening at the exact same time as stagnant wages for most American workers. We're drawing our analysis from some deep dives into American economic change, looking at that really critical period after the mid-90s.
Right, when digital communications just blew the doors open for worldwide economic opportunities.
Exactly. But it also completely restructured the American economy and its workforce. So our mission is, well, it's pretty clear. We need to unpack this. Productivity skyrockets after 1995 because of digital tools, but for the working and middle class, living standards just flatlined. Why didn't those huge gains translate into prosperity for everyone?
It's really the defining question of the last 3 decades, and the sources, they really highlight this dual nature of technology. On one hand, you get incredible speed, amazing connectivity.
The shiny new gadgets.
The shiny new gadgets, yeah. But on the other hand, it's this incredibly powerful engine of disruption and inequality. You have to look past the tech itself and really focus on the upheaval because that's what determines who actually gets the rewards.
Okay, so let's unpack that. I mean, we've all seen the timeline, right? The massive, building-sized computers in the 1940s. But what really sets this revolution apart is just the sheer acceleration. By the late 70s, early 80s, you've got personal computers from Apple, then IBM. Technology was suddenly everywhere.
And that's all driven by Moore's Law, that constant doubling of processing power. It meant tech wasn't just getting cheaper, it was decentralizing economic power itself. And that decentralization is absolutely key. The move from mainframes to PCs meant that computing power left the big control rooms and landed on every single desk.
And in every home, eventually.
And in every home. It basically prepared the ground for the real shift, which was the mass adoption of the internet in the 90s. Once you have that widespread connectivity, everything changes. Suddenly, logistics, communication, market access, it's all instantaneous.
Right. Emails replace memos.
Emails replace memos, which sounds small, but it creates efficiencies we just take for granted now. And crucially, it allowed for this seamless minute-to-minute globalization of business that was, well, just impossible a decade before.
And this change, the speed, it immediately started taking apart established economic structures. This is where the disruption really gets interesting. You saw whole industries just scrambling. Look at music. I mean, Napster, right? Even though it was short-lived, it proved physical distribution was basically dead.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The whole industry was forced to reinvent itself with digital storefronts. And it was the same in media. Newspapers, TV stations. They couldn't rely on, just printing presses or broadcast towers anymore.
They had to go digital, fast, and contend with free content and the 2x47 news cycle.
Exactly. But the biggest, most enduring change was probably in retail.
You have to be talking about Amazon.
Of course. E-commerce, driven by their logistics mastery, didn't just challenge brick-and-mortar stores. It completely rewrote the rules of inventory, of supply chains, of what you, the consumer, expect. That speed is a direct result of this digital integration. And the data confirms it. The objective data shows that these digital technologies gave a significant boost to economic productivity after 1995. You can measure the leap in output per hour worked. It's real.
Okay, so this brings us right back to the central paradox. The whole reason we're doing this deep dive. If the economy became so much more productive, the pie got exponentially bigger, why did the average worker feel like their slice was barely growing?
And that is the fundamental question. If the economy is producing so much more wealth, who is capturing it? And the answer, well, it boils down to 2 big things. Huge changes in the labor market and policy choices that basically allowed inequality to rise.
Let's focus on the labor market changes first. Why didn't the worker benefit? You'd think, new technology should help everyone.
That's the core of it. Economists have a term for this, skill-biased technical change. See, unlike older automation that replaced physical labor, this digital revolution created systems that complemented high-skilled workers.
So software architects, financial planners, people like that.
Exactly. People doing abstract managerial work, but at the same time, it replaced routine work, both cognitive and manual. Think data entry, assembly line work, clerical duties.
So the tech was like a supercharger for the already educated, already well-off workers, but it was just an employment dead end for anyone doing a routine job.
Precisely. If you could manage the new to digital tools, your value soared. If your job was just a series of predictable steps, you were either replaced by a machine or your job was outsourced to a cheaper market. That divergence is step one in widening the income gap.
And we also saw just huge market volatility tied to all this. I mean, the dot-com bubble in the late 90s is the classic example.
It is. It showed how capital could just flood into these new sectors with the promise of huge returns and then vanish overnight. It proved the gains were concentrated and very risky. And all that was happening while a huge part of the population wasn't even in the game yet. This is where the digital divide becomes such a massive issue.
It's not just about having internet access, right?
Not at all. It's about digital literacy. It's about having the educational resources to learn new skills. It's about infrastructure investment in rural and low-income areas.
So if the tools for this new productivity are spread out unevenly, then the wealth from those tools is, well, it's going to be unevenly distributed too.
Of course.
Yeah.
That divide widened every other disparity, economic, educational. Access to these supercharged tools basically became a gatekeeper for opportunity.
And you can't separate this tech leap from the massive restructuring of the American workforce that happened at the same time. We have to talk about the decline of manufacturing, deindustrialization.
It was profound. Foreign competition and automation didn't just slow those industries down, they hollowed them out. The analysis points to companies like U.S. Steel, which was once this symbol of American might.
And it just shed jobs.
Shed jobs rapidly. It slammed the Rust Belt. Cities like Pittsburgh and Cleveland, which were these thriving industrial hubs, they became symbols of this painful economic transition.
So where did all those millions of workers go?
They went into the service sector. That's the other side of the coin. Manufacturing went down, but services just exploded. By the early 2000s, something like 71% of all U.S. jobs were in services.
And that's everything from, healthcare and IT to retail and legal work.
Right, but it's important to see that the service sector isn't one thing. It has those high-wage, high-skill jobs we mentioned, the engineers, the consultants, but it also has a massive number of low-wage, non-union, high-turnover jobs.
And if we need a single symbol for that transition, it has to be Walmart.
Walmart is it. Their growth created millions of jobs, filling that vacuum left by manufacturing. But their business model was all about low costs.
Which meant part-time employees, flexible schedules, and no unions.
Exactly. Walmart's success proved that the new economy could create tons of jobs, but that they were fundamentally different and often lower quality than the union manufacturing jobs they replaced. And that shift in job quality is tied directly to globalization, which itself was supercharged by digital communication. The ability to manage a supply chain on the other side of the world instantly, that's what fueled the outsourcing boom.
So companies could move manufacturing jobs to China, anywhere with lower labor costs.
And this wasn't just some natural market force. It was actively encouraged by policy. Free trade agreements like GATT in 1994, they lowered tariffs, removed barriers.
They made it almost frictionless to move goods and factories around the globe.
Right. And when you do that, domestic workers are suddenly competing with a global labor pool. The result was massive wage suppression at home.
There's no reason to give a raise here if you can just threaten to move the whole factory somewhere cheaper.
Precisely. It put a hard ceiling on blue-collar wages in the U.S.
And that really explains how the American workforce lost so much of its bargaining power. I mean, the decline of organized labor, the numbers are just stark. Union membership peaked at around 35% in 1954.
A huge power base for labor.
A huge base. And today?
Today, it's around 12%. That is a catastrophic collapse in collective bargaining power. And it happened right during this period.
And it wasn't an accident. The sources point to a mix of things. Corporate resistance, a legal climate that favored management, and just the simple structural fact that we shifted from union-heavy jobs in factories to non-union service jobs that are much harder to organize.
So if everything we've talked about explains how the economy changed, this last part explains the brutal outcome, the widening wealth gap. We really have to focus on the numbers between 1979 and 2007. They just lay it all out there.
Give us the hard numbers again. They're pretty stunning.
Okay. During that window, the top 1% of earners saw their wealth increase by a staggering 275%.
Wow. 275. So their wealth almost quadrupled. Now contrast that with the middle 60%, the core of the workforce.
Their gain was only 40%, a much, much smaller gain. So you put those two numbers side by side, 275 versus 40, and you see this dramatic, almost vertical widening of the economic gap.
The gains from the whole revolution just flowed straight to the top.
Overwhelmingly.
We've hit on the big drivers for that, but let's just clarify the role policy played, specifically tax policy. How did that help concentrate so much wealth?
Well, the key is how different kinds of income are taxed.
Yeah.
For most people listening, your income is from labor wages.
Mm-hmm.
For the very top earners, income comes from capital investments, stocks, assets. And starting in the Reagan era and continuing after, we saw these huge cuts to the top income tax rates. But maybe even more important were the big cuts to capital gains taxes.
Sure.
So since the wealth for the top 1% comes from their assets growing in value from capital gains, those tax changes meant their tech and globalization-fueled earnings could grow way, way faster than labor income, which was already being held down by everything else we've discussed.
So you have a perfect storm. High-paying union jobs disappear, replaced by low-wage service jobs. Globalization holds down wages. And then tax policy supercharges investment income over labor income.
And that brings us right back around to the social side of this.
Mhm.
The activist Grace Lee Boggs said that technology can make inequality worse if you don't pair it with efforts for social equity.
And the digital divide is the proof.
It's the real-world proof of that dynamic. The tech was designed for efficiency, but the policy, or lack of policy, is what determined the equity.
We have covered so much ground today. We started with the promise of the digital revolution, this massive boost in productivity, but we tracked how that promise got fractured, leading to this huge workforce restructuring, the fall of union power, and this shocking split between soaring productivity and wages that just went nowhere for most of you listening.
Our goal was to explain the causes and effects of all this change, and I think we've done that by identifying these complex feedback loops. You see how tech-enabled globalization, which, when you combine it with the collapse of union power and a policy climate that favored capital, well, it ensured the gains flowed to the top.
So as you digest this deep dive, we want to leave you with a final thought to consider. We know the technology that boosted economic output also helped concentrate wealth and stagnate wages. So if the goal is broad-based prosperity, how do we need to fundamentally redefine who productivity is actually meant to serve? And maybe more pointedly, what role should the tech companies themselves, the architects of this revolution, play in fixing the inequalities it created?